So good evening, everybody. My name is Bill McCamley. I am the Executive Director of Transit Forward. We are an Austin nonprofit that works very hard to engage and educate our fellow Austinites on transit-related issues, but with a real focus on Project Connect. And so earlier today, we had a presentation by Mr. Peter Park, also shown on your screen right here, who is a nationally known, wave for everybody, that's great, who is a nationally known expert on planning. He worked on a couple of issues in the previous few years with Austin. He has been retained by the city of Austin, by some folks in different departments to help work on planning for how we develop areas around transit stations and corridors in an equitable manner. And so what we really want to do is make sure that everyone has all the information that is possible for all of the work that the city is doing, and also to have a chance for Mr. Park to answer questions. So like I said earlier today, he has about a half-hour to 40-minute presentation on best practices for transit-oriented development and how we do that equitably. And then we'll go to Q&A. So please save your questions. We've got a chat feature on this Zoom that we will be using to take questions. So if you have questions and want to enter it in the chat, please do so in order to minimize all the background noises and such. And we'll be doing it that way. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll either get to them during Mr. Park's presentation or afterwards to answer. Also, this meeting is being recorded and will be put on the Transit Forward YouTube site, as well as some of our other social media outlets. So if you have friends or other associates who really want to watch this thing, let them know it will be there for them. Okay, so I am going to make Peter the host right now. Peter, you are the host now, so you should be able to share your screen and start the presentation.
Great, thanks, Bill.
Yes, sir.
Give me a minute, and hopefully it shows up the way it we want it to. So, are you seeing? What are you seeing there?
We're seeing all of your notes as well as the slides on the bottom. There you go. That is perfect right there.
Okay, there we are. Okay, so just give me 1 sec here, because I got to change my setup now, because the this one.
As we say, technology is great until it isn't.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm going to start. I think I can make this work, and I'm not going to look at my camera because I'm going to look at the screen that's way up there on the wall.
We'll give you some grace for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So thanks for the invitation. And I am very happy to spend some time with you all tonight. I've been working in Austin for some time on various land use and development issues, especially around housing capacity and affordability and equity in Austin. And to prepare for today, I was in Austin last week, and I was catching up with a whole bunch of folks who are involved in your ETOD, Equitable Transit-Oriented Development efforts. And I was really impressed, I must say, how much is happening, how much folks are getting done. And, you know, I talked to a lot of different folks. I got different perspectives about how much is going on. I heard other folks say, here's what we should be doing. I heard folks say, we can't get it all done. I heard folks, like, it's all over the place. And it kind of got me thinking about Alexander Pope's famous quote in his essay on criticism that goes something like, to err is human, to forgive divine. And for city planners, we often paraphrase this. And what we say is, to plan is human, to implement divine. So implementation, great cities, great neighborhoods, great places, they're made through a constant engagement with communities so that we can define what that community's future aspirations are, and then strategically and effectively implement those over time, right? And the creation of these places occurs over various time scales, geographic scales, and economic and demographic scales, ideally in ways that deliver great places for people and benefits and provides opportunities for all. Cities are for people. That's what we designed cities for, and for all people. So congratulations to Austin. You're not the first city to put in a light rail system. And I say congratulations because there's a lot to learn about transit, about evolving our American cities, really back to or introducing new transit-based patterns of development. And there's plenty of examples across the country and the world to learn from, to learn what works and what doesn't work. I was the planning director in Denver, and just as the major measure called Fast Tracks was passed, but I arrived just as the campaign was and the vote was coming up. And at that time, transit was really thought of as the alternative to highways, which is, we're well beyond that in our cities today. But I emphasize this because in Denver, right, at the time, the conversation was really, I couldn't really talk about transit-oriented development, believe it or not, during the campaign. It was about 118 miles of new rail and 21,000 parking spaces, right? And in Denver, the alignment of the rail follows. Some of it is on the street, but a lot of the expansion in Fast Tracks is along industrial rail corridors, along freeways, or through environmental corridors. And so it isn't necessarily right in the mix of where people already are. The good thing is the city is growing, the region is growing, and so land is getting repurposed around transit. But in terms of the first, implementation, a lot of the sites really weren't directly going through or connecting to existing places where people already were. And so, there's a lot to learn from that kind of a way of doing it. That in this city, you garnered such strong support on an on-street alignment is noteworthy. And it speaks volumes of where your community is in terms of creating not only vibrant places for people, but also opportunities for all people. And I think this is one of the legacies of Austin's long history of planning, long history of deep community engagement. And in my view, and what I've learned, and again, I was really impressed with so much of what's happening in the city now, that it occurs to me that you not only have been following many best practices, but in fact, because you're a curious, you're a smart, you're an ambitious city, you're also forging new best practices that others are learning from. So I want to talk tonight about this idea of creating value. Well, I mean, this drawing was done when the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin was growing. And what I love about it is it introduces or shows you a vision for how a city can grow by extension along a beautiful boulevard. And in this street, you see transit, right? You see the streetcar. You see lanes for travel. You see generous sidewalks. And you see a beautifully planted tree-lined boulevard. And it's a design of a street, it's a design of the infrastructure that creates value. It's so beautiful that you would want to have your address, you would want to live on that street, you would want to have your office on that street. And I present this because it seems like, oh yes, that's quite obvious. But if you think about, for the last half century, this is not the criterion that has been used in design of most roads. Most roads have been designed and sized and engineered based on how many cars we expect or anticipate needing to be accommodated in the future, right? Versus designing cities, designing streets, designing the infrastructure to create beautiful places for people, right? And most significantly, creating value, creating places that people want to be. So it's going to take, and it does take, quite a lot of effort to counter the trend that we have
You want
been
to watch
because
a
so much
presentation on
so much
urban
in the
urban
development.
planning?
Oops, in the development. I got an echo. I think
I got an echo. I think someone.
Hey, everybody, if you're not talking, would you mind please muting your microphones just so that Peter can continue? Appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just saying that we have many laws, zoning laws, for example, lending practices, pro formas that really are still based on a very auto-oriented pattern of development. And so we're still pushing in this country, right? Changing the momentum of that. And you guys are at the forefront of it. But knowing that you're going to create a well-designed transit system, it will create value, right? And so Austin has talked about and is committed to not only transit-oriented development, but equitable transit-oriented development, or ETOD. And in some ways, this, in my view, is very much part of thinking about we're creating value and we need to take measures to proactively capture that value, to do good things, to stay ahead of the curve. And I will just emphasize this, I'll probably say it again, but it is particularly important, especially in Austin, because you don't have affordable housing tools available to cities in other states. And those are the cities and states that you're competing with for federal funding. So you need to rely more significantly on incentives, right? And that presents special challenges for addressing market pressures and creating protective measures. But I mean, it is what it is. And I think that Austin has been, has in such a short time, I think, really built an approach to equitable TOD. It's really remarkable. I will say, every major city who has transit has added E to TOD, right? But I don't think any city is doing it as deeply, as thoughtfully as what I observe is happening in this city. And so Bill asked me to talk about some best practices. And I guess from now, you probably understand that I'm feeling like what I learned last week are really a significant number of great lessons and best practices that are being followed in Austin. There's a lot of work for sure, but I want to frame it in a few implementation approaches, because you are in this implementation mode around what I would describe as 5 best practices. One of them is policy related. That's having an integrated land use and transportation set of policies and programs. Talk a little bit about that. And then 4 implementation strategies related to infrastructure and investment strategies, partnership strategies, place-based regulation strategies, and what I call next level planning. And I'll talk about these in the Austin context, as well as some other cities. So maybe you might be familiar with these plans. These have been developed all within the, I don't know, last 10 years or so, maybe a little bit more than that. But if you're familiar with these plans, one of the remarkable things about them, I think, is that there's a lot of overlap. There's reference to topics mentioned in each of the plans that overlaps with another plan. And that's by design. And I think that's an extraordinarily important and positive thing. Some people might say, well, why are we repeating all this stuff? Well, you have to repeat it because the interrelationship between the environment and mobility and housing affordability and the overall form of the city and climate concerns, they're all intermingled in the way that cities make investments, in the way that cities create regulations for development and so forth. And so, when you think about Imagine Austin, there are several major concepts, but one of them is, one, compact and connected, that comes to mind, but also centers and corridors, this notion of a focus on growth along these lines of how people move, as well as identifying centers, not just downtown, but other centers, nodes around the city that are connected along these lines. And in 2016, you had a transportation bond, and that really set the stage for the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, the ASMP, as people refer to it. And the ASMP, I think, is really significant in that it starts with land use and makes that connection to transportation and mobility in service to how you grow and that kinds of development that happens in the city. And the ASMP was clearly integrated with the Cap Metro's transit priority network.
Hey,
Right?
hey, Peter,
So
I'm sorry to interrupt.
again,
Once again, everybody, if you are not talking, if there's any way you could mute your screen in front of you so that we can kind of proceed without the background noise, we'd sure appreciate it. Thanks a ton. Appreciate it. Thanks, Peter.
thank you. Yeah. Okay. Um, and the mobility plan talked about land uses that would be transit supportive in their densities, right? So again, a lot of it might seem obvious, but a lot of cities' mobility is mostly about moving people around, which is, yeah, that's part of it. But for what purpose? It's really connecting people, connecting uses, connecting communities. And then in 2017, the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint, like on those armatures of centers and corridors, identified, the density bonuses and other housing policies that are supported by transit and supported by those transportation corridors, as well as, for example, identifying a need for more affordable housing near transit and services to enable seniors to age in place, and also recognizing the importance of partnerships with public housing authorities and other tools beyond the regulatory tools, beyond sort of a stack of funding from federal and state levels. And then the Equitable TOD Development Policy Plan, which was prepared earlier this year, again, makes those connections to housing, makes those connections to environment, makes those connections to mobility. And your climate equity plan speaks to transportation and land use and makes a connection to the ASMP with regard to climate equity and the 50-50 mode share goal by 2039, that 50% of trips. What is your mode right now?
Close to that because of COVID.
Oh yeah, okay. But that's a pretty ambitious goal, and just in terms of right, suggesting that half the mobility is done on other modes other than driving. So all this to say that in terms of integrating your land use and your transportation, as well as environment, Austin has this whole suite of strong foundations of policy at the high level, at the citywide level, that operates. And as a best practice, I think that's a pretty significant one. In terms of infrastructure investment, I mentioned earlier, right, the decision for your LRT, your light rail, is an on-street alignment. And the process that you went through and the evaluation of that alignment was first and framed by how do you make those first investments so that it is sustainable, so that it can in fact be extended and expanded in a way that makes sense, that's going to bring the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people, especially those for whom transit can provide the most benefit. And so that analysis of understanding population distribution, and housing affordability were certainly part of those decisions in that alignment, as well as an understanding of future population densities and jobs, the destinations of where people are and where they're going, and how can those first investments most significantly optimize providing for those needs. So I care a lot about design, and I think your city does too. And the process and the team that is focused on the urban design aspects of your transit system are doing an amazing job of, and a very sophisticated sophisticated world-class job of thinking about the details of design and wayfinding and the materials and the landscape and understanding the history of places and neighborhoods by design. And it's not just arbitrarily thinking about it. It is deeply researched, and the team is researching and understanding and mapping user mobility patterns, all users, whether you're walking or rolling. And this is just a really sophisticated level of thinking about the design of your transit system, but I think most importantly, thinking about the design of your city. And a major piece of investment is the $300 million anti-displacement fund that is really specifically focusing on, especially along the transit corridors, with an understanding of communities vulnerable to displacement and at various levels, how the distribution of funds for acquiring land that could be provided and reserved for permanently affordable, community-initiated solutions that help identify other supportive actions that could be taken to support communities near transit, as well as specifically those that are investments in new development. And there are tools that the city has produced that are part of guiding how these investments and the decisions about investments can be made. And it allows folks to also kind of see what's happening and policymakers to understand what the choices are, to understand how decisions can be significantly informed and in service to equitable transit-oriented development. The city has I don't know, I can't think of many cities that have such a strong partnership in these kind of efforts. The Project Connect office and the three-party agreement and a joint powers agreement that basically has, to my experience of visiting with these folks and talking to the teams, created a unified voice for how the transportation, these transit investments, how the evolution of the city is getting coordinated in a very conscious way, not in a siloed way. And it's really impressive. And I can't think of any other city right now that is doing what you are doing and have done. So one of the things, and I'll reiterate, in your state, because you don't have the ability to require affordable, you have to rely on incentive. And so as identified in the strategic housing blueprint, partnerships are a really crucial part of how Austin is addressing and will address your affordable housing challenges. And so just a couple of thoughts here is community land trusts can be a very powerful way of thinking and finding partners to reduce the cost of land, right? All things being equal in a development, the cost of land is the significant differential. And so to the extent that that land cost can be underwritten by some other kind of an entity, there can be more opportunities for ensuring long-term permanent affordability and development. And one example is the Urban Land Conservancy in Denver. And they are fantastic, amazing organization. And that they've been doing some really great things. And so here's just some interesting examples. This is Renaissance Apartments. It's actually not far from where I live. It's on a commuter rail line and a future bus rapid transit line. So the Urban Land Conservancy received a donation from a real estate company. of land. And they worked with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless to put 103 units of housing on with on-site supportive services. Over time, the CCH was able to purchase the property, and it's it's a really, to me, a great example of the role that an urban land conservancy or a community land trust can play in helping write down the cost of the land. At Evan Stations Lofts, this is a project that ULC partnered with Medici Communities, and they did 50 affordable units, as well as 7,500 square feet of commercial space. It's a 5-story development. It's the first family low-income housing tax credit project on light rail line, on the Fast Tracks line. And it provides for households ranging from 30 to 60% AMI. A project just outside of downtown, the first station on the way to the airport at Lake Street is a site where you will see partnered with a couple other developers. Well, Medici again, the site was split, and Medici developed 66 permanently affordable units, and another firm did a mixed deal of 312 market rate and 16 affordable units in a 16-story mixed-use building. And at Mile High Vista, the Urban Land Conservancy, this was their first master planned project. It also involved some pretty significant remediation. But it was a partnership with the city of Denver. This is the site of the Corky Gonzalez Denver Library, as well as a mixed-use development with 80 affordable units and 10,000 square feet of commercial. There'll be in the future 102 additional affordable studios and 3 bedrooms. And these are reaching at 20 to 80% AMI, right? So these partnerships are really critical. Other kinds of forms of partnerships include, you have 2 housing authorities in Denver, Denver Housing Authority, DHA, developed a new mixed-use community, replacing what was formerly called South Lincoln Park Homes. It was 250 units of housing originally, and this was an area that was located right along a light rail station, just the first one out of downtown, and it's a phased development. I think there were 8 different phases, but the first phase had 100 public housing units for senior and disabled households. And by 2012, 8,000 square feet of commercial space was added that included a culinary training school, computer lab, some nonprofit organization space, and it's a LEED Platinum project. The second phase added another 93 rental units for public housing, and also some low-income LIHTC units, as well as a blend of market rate units and 5,500 square feet of commercial, and that was a LEED Gold standard. And then phase 3 included 87 market rate, some public housing, and 11,000 square feet of commercial space. There are 6 other phases of the project, and at the end of the day, there'll be 800 units here in a mixed use, mixed income, affordable housing authority, market rate housing units, and those 800 housing units on the same area that was once 250 units. So, but again, it is this very conscious partnership with those who control the land, right? And so the next thing I want to talk about is place-based regulations. And but I'm going to start this kind of as a segue from where I was before, because in the gray here, you can see the LRT alignment, and in the lighter white, in the whiter portion, that's a half-mile buffer, a half-mile distance from the corridor. And you can see quite a lot of unzoned land. This is land that the state owns. And it could be used for a whole range of development potential. And it is, right? I mean, it isn't just state-owned buildings, state institutions. There are private development on it. There's housing developments on this site. So, I mean, in all of these lands, so not in all, on many of these parcels. And so over time, that might be a pretty significant opportunity in terms of talking about how to leverage and underwrite the cost of some of the development and ensure long-term affordability. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things that are happening right now. And I think one thing to understand about Austin is because you guys have been doing so many things for a long time, maybe now is a good time to take some assessment of cumulatively what have these efforts contributed just along this LRT line. And so the staff helped me develop these maps. So going back to 2004, the University Neighborhood Overlay, or UNO, as people often describe it, was put into place. And, that provided density increases, bonus programs, one of the most successful bonus programs in terms of providing affordable, but it also included design and streetscape standards, right? Improving the design of the public realm. And so if we're going to add more units, more housing capacity, more density, making the public space better, making the walking environment better is a really essential part. So that was a pretty significant piece of work in combining those various aspects of, I mean, there are a lot of places that just get a lot of density. I just, and a lot of the times, unfortunately, they're what I describe as density without urbanism. Like you get a lot of housing units, but there's nothing really great, right? Yeah, and so in terms of the place. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about UNO is the decoupling of parking, right? In 2004, I don't know who was doing that. That really is a pretty significant idea and notion that the parking and the unit don't necessarily have to go together, that if you don't need to have parking, you don't get it, right? You don't need it, you don't get it. And so that even today, there's a lot of communities that are just thinking about this or learning about this, right? Then in 2007, something called Commercial Design Standards, often referred to as subchapter E. But here again, it applies along the light rail lines, the designated core transit corridors. And there are public improvements, urban design treatment, and other design standards that go along with allowing for more development, but at the same time, providing for better design. Similarly, in vertical mixed use, there's a bonus in terms of how much development can happen. And that too includes design standards for sidewalks and building placement, connectivity, screening, a whole number of things, public space, activating streets. And you can see that you're probably beginning to see that these are building, right? These are a whole bunch of efforts that have been initiated by a whole different range of stakeholders and neighborhood folks and developers and elected leaders and advocates, but cumulatively they are adding up. So then when you look at downtown and the density bonus that was put into place in 2008, this is one of the most significant ones in terms of area. And then TOD plans for the Riverside corridor. This implements small area station plans through some very specific zoning regulations, again, in support of transit. And then last year, vertical mixed use 2 that allows parcels to gain an extra 30 feet. That's up to 90 feet in most of the zones in exchange for more affordable units. And more affordability is required along the light rail lines under this provision. And then compatibility on corridors, which is pretty significant in defining that along light rail corridors, compatibility or reductions in height to the building on the corridor apply only within 200 feet of whatever the triggering properties are, the kind of properties that would invoke these height reductions. But it's much less than the current compatibility standards. And if you're doing the density bonus, it's within 100 feet, right? So these are just beginning to add up to make this area within the light rail corridor even more transit supportive. In last year, the City Council approved changes to the zoning. It's a similar bonus program to the vertical mixed use that allows residential and commercially zoned properties. You know, we also mapped where there's multifamily zoning and PUD zoning, which for the most part, we can presume were negotiated to support more density. And when we map those, they fill in even more. And then the proposed 3 units per lot where single family is allowed fills in out to the edges. And so, you know, cumulatively, there's quite a lot that has been done over the years that are supportive of transit. And this taken together, we could describe as a capacity. I don't know that anyone's calculated that yet, but that's going to be really important to describe in the application for the capital investment grant, the CIG grant. So with regard to like next level planning, what I mean by that is, you know, when we do plans to implement them, sometimes it's changes to the zoning, right? Regulatory strategies. To implement them, sometimes it's making investments in affordable housing. Sometimes it's making investments in infrastructure, right? And sometimes it's engaging in partnerships with other agencies, other entities, public, private entities in order to bring something to fruition, right? But also sometimes when we do a plan, and this is frustrating to some folks, I understand that. Sometimes there's a next level of planning that has to happen. And this is particularly true when it comes to setting the stage for making changes in land use regulations. Sometimes you can operate at a kind of a higher level, and sometimes very specific to things like light rail or some other areas, it becomes really important to do a next level of planning and engagement so that the policies that get adopted are solidly thick ice and a foundation for changes to regulations that might be followed in order to implement the plan. And so, you know, what I found out is that the city is in the midst of working on these now. The team, I mean, the ETOD policy plan was adopted earlier. The policy toolkit, the final report is out. There are dashboards. I talked about some of those things, but
Hey everybody, we seem to have lost.
plan.
Oh, there. Hey Peter, you dropped out
Oh.
for about 10 seconds. Can you go
Okay.
back and just repeat what you were just saying?
Sure. I don't know what the last thing you heard, but what I was describing is the city has completed the ETOD policy plan, the policy toolkit, the ETOD final report, and they're working on plans for North Lamar Transit Center, South Congress Transit Center, and these again are going to be supportive for the next level of regulatory changes to enhance the viability and the vitality of development that occurs around transit. Later this year, the team will be rolling out the ETOD implementation plan. And that's something that I think you want to pay attention to because it is going to have some recommendations for action. It's an implementation plan. And these things need to get decided on, and these need to get done before next year, so that work a lot of the work can go into the application for your grant. So just in conclusion, a couple of final thoughts. This is a time where it's really important for Austin to focus on your next major milestone, which is the CIG application. You're competing with a lot of other cities, Phoenix and San Francisco and San Jose and Miami and Chicago and Minneapolis, St. Paul, Charleston, Houston. There's a lot. And this is a time where, you have to show what you know, to prioritize what can you realistically get done by the second quarter of 24, and clearly document how these measures, together with everything else that is already in place, will competitively position Austin. So I do think that this is a really important time to support the agency teams who are working. They're working really hard with communities, with each other. They don't necessarily need a lot of new tasks or new ideas. There's a lot, and like I said, based on a lot of what they've heard and what they've studied, they're going to be rolling out the implementation plan later this year. If past has provided any guidance, I think there'll be a lot of really thoughtful and very effective implementation activities outlined in that plan. And these are folks that have a great amount of expertise. There's a significant amount of policy foundations already and ideas and direction to work with. But I think as a community, it's important to recognize that you have a limited amount of time and limited resources to get what is a lot of work done. And on the screen is just kind of a simple way of describing the criteria for how the federal transit, how FDA will be scoring and looking at different cities. And land use, economic development, right? Those are some pieces that a lot of the planning and zoning and regulatory work that has been going on, and there's some more pieces to do, will help to improve on the scoring. And I would say that, as the last series of maps demonstrate, you're doing pretty well. I mean, I'm not saying you can rest on your laurels. There's plenty of work to do. But a lot of improvement is going to be addressed in some of what the staff talk about in terms of the early out work. So, I would really encourage folks to engage and support the team's recommendations in the ETOD implementation plan that's coming out later this year. And also recognize that, you don't need to fix everything right now. There's more to do. There's always more to do. There will always be more to do. Cities are never done. But this next level of plans need to be done because they need to proceed and or run concurrent, right? Ideally, with the policy foundations that is getting defined in the plans. And in terms of density, you're doing pretty well from a scoring. And I think it's important to understand that. The other thing to understand is this is existing population. So one of the scoring elements will include, well, what is the existing number of people per square mile, right? Potential riders and how might policies, or more importantly, regulations, the things that have teeth, what do they allow in terms of increasing the capacity, potential capacity, and potential ridership? Right now, Austin is doing pretty well. In 3 of the 15 categories, you're at high. You have one medium high, and the majority sit at medium. You have a few at medium low, but for the most part, the existing density is pretty good, and it's again part of what supports the alignment that was chosen. I think it's critical to recognize that this is population. That's different than the capacity in the zoning, right? And so, just as you move forward, this is one of the criterion, but the capacity of what that the cumulative effect of what many of those regulatory improvements that apply within the half mile from the corridor today, well, that needs to get assessed, and that needs to be understood, and to help tell a more detailed story. So I guess my party message is just, it's a time to focus. There'll be time for the next level of work after the spring. And again, as I said, you can't figure it all out right now. And you know what? You're going to have to adjust and update in the future. That's going to continue to happen. What's critical now is documenting where you are. And, it's not a time to let the perfect be the enemy of the great. And I think there's a lot of great work that has been done. What folks in Austin need to be doing is really rowing in the same direction, and particularly having a positive community conversation, especially during the FTA review. I mean, they're looking at application materials, but they're also, they're not going to want to, they might become concerned. It's a lot of discussion about, well, we should have done this, and we could have done this, and right. You're doing a lot of things. I mean, just last week, right? No parking minimums. That's a big deal. And while this is not a time to rest on your laurels, I hope that folks don't forget to celebrate and recognize a lot of the many accomplishments that have been made, are being made, and the staff are working on right now to bring forward for consideration in advance of the CIG application. So with that, I'd love to have some questions and have some discussion. Happy to clarify any of the points that I talked about.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. So we have about 15 folks on the call right now. Does anybody have any questions? I think there's a few enough people on here. If you just raise your hand and unmute yourself, we'll kind of go from there. Anybody have questions? Timothy. I'm going to read this from Timothy Bray, and then we'll move along. So this is Councilor Chito Vela's, Councilmember Chito Vela's staffer. In the past, where are we at here? There we go. In the past, development on the ground has gotten far ahead of planning processes. We get stuck at vision planning and never get to implementation. A good example is the South Central waterfront, where we are years behind on the regulating plan. How do we catch up with realities on the ground? In a related question, how do we avoid creating complex custom zoning districts for each individual area of transit-oriented development that are difficult and complex to create and maintain? Ms. Park?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Updating the ERC is part of the work that the staff is focusing on to bring clarity. And again, I think a lot of the plans that were done in the past didn't have the certainty of transit, right? Or the form of transit, right? I mean, it was, the expectation was going to be a bus or a BRT I mean, who knows, right? But now you know what you're going for, and you know what you need to design to, and I hope that will help clarify the discussions. And certainly, I think that meeting the criteria as part of the application is going to help discipline kind of what are the topics to focus on. With regard to the process of one-off customized zoning, uh, I hear you on that. Um, that is fundamentally the symptom of a base code system that's not working. So I do think that in some of the early out work, the staff will hopefully be able to forge some approaches to the updates to codes that are um, supportive of transit. However you do a plan, it needs to be right place-based and it needs to be localized. But it's quite possible to create a kit of tools, a kit of zones that work in more than just one place. And I think that's going to be important to resist the temptation to customize, because ultimately that creates a lot of uh, um, actually inequity in many ways, but also complexity for the end user, whether they are a homeowner, whether they're a developer, whether the staff, whether they're just a neighbor who can't quite figure out what might happen in their neighborhood. So clarity is definitely on everybody's mind in these regulations.
Thank you, Peter. Do we have other questions? I don't. Here we go. From David Fowles. Peter, how should we approach areas around stations that are part of later phases of Project Connect?
Later phases?
Mm-hmm. So I don't want to put words into David's mouth, but for instance, we have extensions that are priority extensions on the lines. Obviously, the plan with Project Connect is to go further out, and that is going to happen at some later date. So what's the plan, or what's the best practice in other places that you've seen for how to plan for those types of areas?
Yeah. So now that, right, you've got the overall vision of this framework, right, and you made the decision about what's the first piece of that framework that you want to install. Oh, and then right, these extension pieces. Grooving this technique of doing the station area plans, these corridor plans, get them done, do them, because that's the place to engage community. That's the place to engage property owners. That's a place to set the vision for what um, you aspire to. And I think you're going to get better at it. And my suggestion is, as you establish the technique and the methodology, stick with it. Like, of course, you're going to adjust it. Is it going to be perfect? No, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you start a new plan, right? So I do think that this is giving Austin a great opportunity to create kind of and actually you've built a system of typologies in the ETOD policy plan. And so, right, easiest way I can describe typologies is sort of hit parts, right? And so some areas, some stations are going to be more urban, some might be less urban, some are going to be more residential in use, some might be more employment or commercial. So, there's a range, there's a set of regulations can go with these types, and I think what you're going to see is Austin's just going to get better and better at being able to do the plans, do them quickly or quicker, right? Because you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? And I think a lot of that method is getting established now, and yeah, so that's the best way that we do it. A lot of cities don't do that. It's sort of like, well, what's this planner style? What's this planner, right? What's difficult is the planner might not work in the city when it actually starts to get implemented in later years, right? So a common set of terms, a common process for planning is really critical there, and that does not ignore the individual personality of different neighborhoods and different places, right? It's a consistent method.
Thank you, Peter. Other questions? If so, please feel free to put them in the chat. All right, I don't see any. So unless someone else has some burning questions, I will say that this presentation has been recorded. Transit Forward will be putting it on our YouTube site and sharing it on our social media. Please feel free to share it once we publish it, probably tomorrow morning, with anyone that you know that might be interested in watching this. Thank you, everybody, very, very much for your participation and for your engagement. And I'll say one thing editorially. I know there are some folks out there in our community who have opposed Project Connect in the past, are continuing to do so now in various forms, even though the vast, vast majority of Austinites really want this program. They want the climate change, safety, affordability benefits that are coming from all of the bus, train, pickup options with Project Connect. I just encourage you to make sure you continue to engage with your friends and neighbors in person, through social media. Make sure you engage with them and really help us, help the community make this thing work in the best way possible. So thank you very much for your time, Peter. We really appreciate your expertise. Thank you for making the time this afternoon and today, and we'll continue to share these types of conversations about really important pieces of Project Connect and other transit issues moving forward. Thanks, everybody. Hope everyone has a wonderful evening.